Oh, folks, that tune just puts a smile on my face every time I hear it because it means I get to host another episode of the Rec Poker Podcast. I've got the best freaking job in the world. Thanks for joining me for another week of the Rec Poker Podcast here, folks. My name is Jim Reed. I'm Blusterini in the home game and at Rec Poker Jim on Twitter. I am joined by one solitary Wrecking Crew member tonight. He's Rob Washam. He runs the book study here at Rec Poker. He offers his coaching in the Rec Poker shop. He's one of the OGs of Rec Poker Nation. And Rob, where can people find you if they want to find out more about the wonderful miracle worker that is Rob Washam?
I'm known as Rabman50 just about everywhere.
And he's calling in from sunny Arizona. So between him and me up here in Southern Ontario, looking at the rest of the contiguous United States, we've got you surrounded. And we're coming in to talk about some fun over here at Rec Poker. It's the forums edition of the podcast. So we're going to be taking a look at a post from the Rec Poker forums. They're free to join. And of course, like so much that what we do here is free. We're a largely volunteer-based organization. We have to thank our sponsors, the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino, for their support. And so if you're in Minnesota, head on over to Columbus, Minnesota, just north of the Twin Cities, and have some fun at the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino, and tell them Rec Poker sent you. So it's Monday night. We're here playing in the Play Money Nightly No Limit Hold'em home game series that John Somsky runs 10 to 11 tournaments every week. He is an Iron Man, and we're lucky to have him. And every Monday night, we get together on the forums edition of the podcast and talk about a hand from the Rec Poker forums. Did I mention that they are free to all community members to come and use? And if you want to take your game to the next level, drop $5 by using the code RECPOKER, and you can get your first month of premium membership for only $5. So this is a post by DaChiwaiian called Punt or Cooler. And we talk about tournament poker a lot here. This is a cash game that DaChiwaiian is bringing us to, a 1-3 cash game in the PNW poker room. So I'm going to kind of review the action of the hand and just make sure everyone's got the details in mind. And then Rob and I'll rewind to the beginning of the hand and go through it and talk about some of the decision points and what we think DaChiwaiian might have done differently, what they were doing well, and some other factors to consider along the way. So at the PNW poker room, Chiwaiian says, the tables are filled mostly with 1-3 Rex, but we get most of our action from 3-5 players waiting for tables or cooling their bankroll. Lots of limping pre-flop. In this case, early position raises to $10, and we get 4 callers. Hero has ace king on the button and 3 bets to 55. Hero has bought in for 450, but built up his stack to 800 and is perceived as tight and aggressive. 2 people call. The flop is 8-6-3 rainbow. The hero, so I guess it checks around to the hero, who c-bets for $55 and gets 1 caller. So we go to the turn. This villain is a loose aggressive player playing 40% of hands, open raising 15% of hands to 20 when the standard table raise is to raise it to 12 or 15. This player is opting to raise to 20 instead. They sat down 30 minutes prior and have not shown any crazy bluffs. Villain started with 475, so we've got the villain covered. 475 is the effective stack. They call the c-bet. The turn is an ace, completing the rainbow. Hero bets 75 with top pair, top kicker. Villain check raises to 200, and as played, as DaChiwaiian says here, as played, Hero calls the additional 125. The river's a 9, and villain shoves for the remaining 225. So I just want to go over some of the details here. So we're going to start the hand again. Ace king on the button. Early position opens to $10 and gets 4 callers. So when Hero's on the button here holding ace king, I think this is a great spot for a 3-bet. We're going to thin the field. We're going to get called by some worse hands. When the hero chooses $55, Rob, that seems to me to be a little small given how much is in the pot already. I might size that up a little bit. What's your take on that?
I think that's true. Especially in cash. You're going to be a
Good
lot
point.
more aggressive in cash than you are in a tournament situation. So in a cash game, I think, I'd be looking at 70, $75, maybe even 80, just a little bit more because it is a cash game. You're going to get a lot of, especially at 1-3, you're going to get a lot of calls with hands worse than yours. Plus, you're going to be isolating a lot better. You're going to get a lot of the more marginal hands to fold. So I think you could go to $75, $80 on this.
And I think it's very different in a case where there's only one other player that's open in front of you and you're making the three bet. When you're squeezing against a large field of continuing players like this, the problem is once one of them calls, the other players behind them are getting extremely good odds to come along with the same kind of hands that they would have called that original open with. So you really have to bring the hammer down price wise in order to actually add the kind of fold equity and thin the field, which is one of the principal reasons to make three bets in spots like this. You really do want to take this heads up or maybe against two opponents. They open, so the hero raises to 55 and we get two callers. So I think we can, if we find out later that the two callers do not include the original raiser. So it's two of the over, or maybe it does, but at the end of the day, the villain is one of the over callers. They called the original open and then they called the three bet. One note I have for DaChiwaiian here, they say that the villain is a leg playing 40% of hands, but says that they're open raising 15% of hands to $20. And I don't think of open raising 15% of hands as being loose and aggressive. I feel like maybe this is a player that's actually maybe pretty loose and passive if they're playing 40% of hands, but only opening 15% of hands, especially if they choose a larger sizing. To me, that's actually indicative of a player who's playing the strong hands to a big sizing and is playing the weaker hands passively. So a question of terminology there, DaChiwaiian. I'm not sure based on this, especially he says he's only seen them for 30 minutes and they haven't shown any crazy bluffs. I'm not sure that doesn't scream lag to me. I'm not sure. So I follow up DaChiwaiian, Scott. I know you're listening to the show. DaChiwaiian is also a fun follow on Twitter. That's where I know him from originally. So Scott, feel free to update the forum post here or to tag us on Twitter. And let us know if you have a little more information about this player that made you that made you describe them as loose and aggressive, because this actually feels pretty loose and passive to me.
I agree. I was thinking of that when I was looking at the 40% to 15%. Typically, somebody that's a leg is going to be, yeah, he might be 40%, but he's also then going to be raising 30%.
Yeah.
And not 15%. He's going to be raising more than half the time that he's playing. So he's going to be in the 25 to 30 range probably to be considered a leg. Here I would call this guy, when I do my HUD stuff, I'd say this guy would be a fish.
Yeah.
Because he's playing way too many hands versus the number of hands he's open raising.
Mm-hmm. And there's that big gap between their VPIP and their PFR, right?
Yep.
So that's a problem, that passivity. And I think also players that are truly wide and aggressive or loose and aggressive, I tend to skew towards a smaller sizing for their opens because they're doing it with much a wider range. Mm-hmm. Even at cash games, I wouldn't. Okay, enough about that. But anyway, I'm curious about the terminology choice on that, because it does affect the action later, how you think they're playing some of these hands. Poker is all about ranging opponents, and that's about making good assumptions about their opening ranges, the range that they start the hand with. So it seems like a trivial point, but it is important. It's important, and it has a knock-on effect throughout the hand. So we've made the three bet. We've been called by two players, so we're going to the flop. Things are going pretty well. We're in position. We've got a good hand. We've thinned the field down to two opponents, down from 5. And we're going to get to go post flop with range advantage with a strong hand. And this is what Sky Matsuhashi refers to as a bread and butter position, a bread and butter spot. So that's all going pretty well. The flop comes 8-6-3 rainbow, and it checks around to our hero here, who puts in a C bet. We did some quick math here, Rob, before we got started. We think the pot's just a little under $200 here, maybe after they take the rake out about $190. In a vacuum, you've made a 3-bet pre-flop. Now, what's the sizing that you're going to choose on a board like 8-3-6 rainbow? Because I know in 3-bet pots, you can kind of size down a little bit. And in boards like this, I think some players get kind of caught up between different factors telling them like what sizing to choose on a board like this. This is going to be a board where we've got all the over pairs. We probably don't have a lot of like the 2-pair combos, the straight draw combos. We're going to have a lot of 1-pair hands and pretty strong 1-pair hands. And our opponents that are calling are going to have more of those kind of like made pair on the board, some draws, some 2-pairs, some sets. What does that mean for you in this spot, Rob? If you're choosing to C-bet, and if you are going to C-bet, what size you might choose?
Yeah, I think C-betting's a coin flip here. Without knowing how the other player plays, and we don't have any stats on him. We don't know if he's a lag or if he's just a calling station, whatever. But in this type of situation, we should have pretty strong ranges all around. I mean, we shouldn't have, it's not like a single raise pot against a big blind where you're the big blind is gonna be wide open. I mean, they've already called a raise and then they called a 3-bet. So the range is going to have to be somewhat strong. So yeah, I don't mind a C bet here. I think a C bet of 55 is probably okay. It's a little more than a quarter. I wouldn't mind seeing 60, 65, maybe even 70 here. But yeah, I think right in that range between 55 and 70 is probably a good range.
Yeah, and we don't know what the third player's chip stack is, but if we're going off the effective stack of 475, we don't need to make a huge bet in order to get. If we do decide that we want to turn this into a big hand, we can do that geometrically without having to get crazy later in the hand. So I think that that makes sense too. And it's one of the nice things about a 3-bet pot is it builds the pot already. So a lot of that pot geometry has already been taken care of. And I think you made a great point there, Rob, that in 3-bet pots and 4-bet pots, of course, but in 3-bet pots and up, you've already eliminated a lot of the garbage hands. So the continuing range for each of these players should be pretty narrow already. So we, as the hero, C-bet 55 into about 190. We get one caller from the player in the cutoff. So let's just analyze this spot a little bit here. So this player has called the original open. Then they called the 3-bet, getting a really good price because there was already another caller in front. They only had to call 45 to win, a couple $100 or something like that. So they were getting a pretty good odds. This is the player that probably has the widest range of anybody that was still in the hand post flop, which does concern me a little bit on boards like 8-6-3, because when they do continue, some of it's going to be draws, some of it's going to be pairs, but they've got a lot of nuts there. They've got a lot of hands that can turn the nuts or river the nuts, and they just don't have a lot of air. So it's a tricky spot for a hand like Ace King coming into the turn. So we do get to the turn. Pretty good card for us comes an ace, completing the rainbow. So again, no flush draws were possible on the flop, and no back doors are going to come in for flushes. There's now 4 suits on the board. We have turned top pair, top kicker. It's 8-6-3 rainbow. It checks to us, and the pot's about $300 right now. So what's our play here, Rob? $300 pot. It's gone check call. We turned an ace. So I think the two things that are kind of competing in my mind are can we get value from a worse hand? We don't have to worry about protection as much anymore, but we still don't want those straight draws to come in. And I think, against part of their range, we're not doing very well at all, like the sets and that sort of thing. But against a lot of their range, they're one pair plus draw hands. I think we're doing pretty well. Are you feeling comfortable when that turns the ace, and what's your action?
Yeah, I think when I see the ace, I'm grinning. I've got top pair, top kicker now on a really not a really scary board based on the action so far. So I might bet more than 75. I
Mhm.
might bet, I might bet 100, 150 even. Because I'm going to feel pretty good about building a pot here with top pair, top kicker on this type of board. Couple of things. If you do that, if you come out with a $150 bet, when that villain raises to 200, he's not going to be able to do that. When he raises, he's going to have to go all in. Right. So you're limiting him. You're probably going to get nothing but a callback if you bet a little bit bigger there. But once you do get a callback, I'm starting to get a little nervous because
Yes.
if you think about a 40% range, if he's actually getting involved 40% of the time, now he hasn't shown any aggressive action until the check raise on the. So typically a loose passive player is going to be very passive until they have a real hand. And that's when they're going to come alive. And when you see them come alive with that hand or with making an aggressive action, that's when you need to start to get nervous. So take out your Flopzilla, look at a 40% range, and you'll see there's every ace is in there, every pocket pair is in there, and then a lot of other stuff. But the ones that you're worried about right now is the pocket eights, the pocket sixes are there, the pocket threes are there, all the aces. So ace eight, ace six, ace three, they're all there, but whether they're suited or not. So that 40% range has all of that in it. So, and again, we talked about him being loose passive. And if he's loose passive, the minute he makes an aggressive action, he's not doing it with less than two pair. He's not doing it with ace nine on this board.
Yeah, I like that. And I think that's a key element to this is that, and this is why I wanted to talk about the tight and aggressive versus loose and aggressive, or tight, loose and passive player typing earlier, because when passive players show signs of aggression, if they were prone to bluffing, they wouldn't be loose passive players. So you have to
Right.
think, and especially on boards like this where there's no flush draw, the only natural bluff candidates are going to be hands like 4-5, 5-7, 7-9, 7-10, hands that have a straight draw available to them, or pair plus draw. But even the pair plus draws, the ace kind of counterfeits their draw a lot of the time here, unless it's very, very specific. So we're kind of eliminating a lot of the hands they might choose to bluff with. And when your opponent doesn't have a lot of bluffs in their range, top pair, top kicker is still just a one pair hand. And, a lot of the hands that you beat, they're probably going to be playing more passively than this when there are so few bluffs available. Interestingly, the one thing we didn't talk about on the flop was the opportunity for an over bet. And this is the kind of board regular listeners will know. This is the kind of board that Chris Jones has mentioned when you have a range advantage. 8-6-3 rainbow. There's no made flush. There's no made straight. There's no flush draw. These are good boards to overbet when you have range advantage, because if your opponent does have a hand like ace-8 or 10-8 or like top pair, it puts them in a very difficult position because you've got nines, tens, jacks, queens, aces. And even though you don't have as many of the like pocket sixes, pocket threes sets, you still have a number of really, really strong hands that put their one pair hands in a lot of trouble and make them feel uncomfortable. And it's hard for them, unless they have absolutely smashed this with two pair or better. Even their pair plus draw hands are not going to feel comfortable continuing to an oversized bet. And Rob's mentioned maybe they have a hand like ace-8 or ace-6 or ace-3. they're definitely continuing to that smaller $55 flop bet that we put out there, but make it 150. And I think a lot of those hands go away, which is a curse and a blessing, because of course you want to get value from worse hands. So that's always the tension when it comes to value sizing. But I thought it was worth mentioning, because what ends up happening is our opponent does check raise us on the turn, and we're saying that players, typically players like this aren't going to do that without having a value hand, and we're just losing to all the value hands. They're not doing it with ace queen. They're not doing it with ace jack. They're not doing it with 8-9. They're doing it with a better hand than one pair, and we've just got the best one pair hand. So it's now putting us in a kind of uncomfortable position as it's played. Now we're still getting a pretty good price on the check raise. We're going to have to call 125, and there's $575 in the pot. So, I mean, we're getting really good odds. We've got top pair, top kicker. Our opponent only has 225 behind. Is there, I kind of feel like maybe every option's on the table here. I could see an argument for folding if we knew this was a player that only ever did this with hands that had us crushed. I mean, calling makes sense against certain opponents. Against certain opponents, you could even consider shoving yourself here. Is there a clear favorite to you, Rob, or how do you feel in this spot? Oh, Rob might have just had a little signal issue there. It feels to me like against this opponent, I'm starting to get some alarm bells going off that this player, it's not a flush draw board. There's not a lot of bluffs available to this player, so this is kind of ringing in as value to me. Sorry, Rob, we lost you there for a second. But,
yeah, I saw that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say I don't think I'd ever jam here. I'd probably call more often because it's a cash game. Try to get to a cheap.
Yeah, good point.
But when I called here, the minute the villain shoves into me, I am shutting down and probably folding.
Which
Because
stinks.
yes.
No, go ahead.
And I was listening to an old episode of Smart Poker Study podcast, and Sky was talking about how he got into this hand and he knew the guy had a specific card that he was betting. And even though he had the pot odds to call, the fact that he knew that this guy could never have bet without that specific card, he folded. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking to myself, how many times do you get to the river and you got a top pair, top kicker type hand, and you're getting the odds to call because you only have to be right, 20% of the time,
Right.
But that the only way that person could be doing it is with a hand that beats you. So even though you're getting the odds, unless it's a certain type of opponent that is capable of trying to bluff you off the pot, you need to fold, because like I've said before, they always have
it. Yeah, you have said that. It's true. And it's a tricky spot here. I mean, DaChiwaiian says like this player only sat down 30 minutes ago. So it's not like we have a lot of tells about them, but they do feel like they can kind of estimate their percentages for playing and open raising, saying they haven't shown any crazy bluffs. We don't know, if they have shown any bluffs that made sense. Again, this is the kind of board that there aren't a lot of those natural bluffs that make a lot of sense, which intelligent players, thoughtful players will then find other bluffs to take their place instead, air balls and blocker bluffs instead of equity bluffs.
Yeah.
So it does depend, but I mean, I'm with you. The check raise on the turn, it's kind of like the street of honesty for a lot of players. I don't know. This is a 1-3 game, so I think it's probably the street of honesty for a lot of 1-3 players too, where if they had a set of threes or a set of sixes or a set of eights or 8-6 on the flop, they don't want to blow, the other person off the hand. And then when the turn comes the ace, you got to think about, you're the three better pre-flop. So you have a lot of aces in your range. And if you had pocket kings or pocket queens or pocket jacks instead, that ace is probably going to slow you down a little bit. So you don't make a great target for a bluff check raise on the turn either when that ace comes in. That ace makes a lot of the hands that you were bluff c betting with on the flop, like your ace king and your ace queen and your ace jack kind of hands and that kind of thing. So this is kind of just more and more sounding like a value play by the opponent. And I think we get like, we can't just fold every turn to a check raise. Like we have made it to top pair, top kicker. I don't want us to turn into a bunch of nits here. But it's, 1-3 check raises, aggressive players from passive, aggressive plays from passive players. It does kind of, and we're going to have some stronger hands here too. We're going to have our own, well, actually, are we? We're going to have we've got pocket aces. We've probably got pocket eights. Maybe we've got ace 3 suited. There's only 2 combos left of that. Maybe we've got ace 6 or ace 8 sometimes, but although it's a pretty good squeeze spot, pre-flop with 5 players in for $10. I'd be squeezing some of those suited aces from the button.
Is our opponent thinking about what we have, or does he think we have ace king?
Yeah, good question. Is he putting us on ace king? Right? Is that
because that's what we always have when we raise.
That's old chestnut. Yeah. Yeah. So these are all just, and again, we don't get to know. So I'm just we're just talking about some of the different things that we can be thinking about in this spot.
I'm assuming he folded because he never told us what the villain had.
Yeah, this will be interesting. So as played, the hero calls the 125 check raise, the extra 125 from the check raise up to 200. So we go to the river with a pot of about 700, if my math is correct, and the villain has about 225 behind. The river comes in 9, and DaChiwaiian mentions in the post here that this completes the 10-7 draw and the 7-5 draw to straights, which I don't, and this is DaChiwaiian saying, I don't find likely given the action. And I think it totally fits the action pre-flop, getting really good odds from a loose passive player to continue to the open at with like 5-7 and even to the 3-bet, getting really good, a really good price with like 7-5 suited, maybe 10-7 feels like a bit of a stretch, but it's not impossible. 1-3, people like to play hands. 40% of hands includes a lot of those suited gappers and that kind of thing. I don't know if they would.
I don't give them the.
No, you don't give them the 10-7?
I don't give them either of those hands. No.
Okay.
No.
So and even if he did, I don't think they go for the check raise on the turn, honestly. I think
Correct.
Maybe they check raise the flop because you do have a lot of yourself. You, as the 3-better, you have a lot of unpaired over cards here. But when the ace comes, I think that's the 5-7s of the world, the 10-7s of the world. If they were going to check raise, they would have done it on the flop. And so this feels again like, and even, so that's good because we can remove some of those straight combos from their range when the 9 comes on the river. And I think if that's true, then the 9 can't really help them much because I don't think they're check raising the turn with 8-9. I don't think they're check raising the turn with 6-9. Pocket 9s? No, because they would have check raised the flop.
No. Yep.
So when they
pocket
leave
9s,
here,
not against an ace.
No.
Yeah. No, there's 9 didn't help them at all.
It would be hard to find a way for the 9 to help them given the action. Right. So I think so. DaChiwaiian, they're thinking well about their opponent's range at this point. Because I agree. I don't think those are particularly likely to have gotten all the way here that way. And when you think about the other hands that a 9 would help, I just think they're not check raising the turn. They're not check calling flop, check raising turn. So So that does kind of change the equation a little, doesn't it, Rob? Because now you're basically saying you're only behind the hands that you were already behind, the two
Yep.
pairs and the sets, and that's
Yep.
really it. So
And those are the only hands he's check raising and then jamming the river.
right,
There's he's not doing it with ace queen, ace jack, ace 10. He's not doing with any of those other aces. He's either got ace 8, ace 6, 3, or he's got a set of eights, set of sixes, or a set of threes.
I'd give him 8-6 as well. I think there's a couple
Yeah,
combos of 8-6
yeah, maybe,
suited out there that
maybe,
he
but
could he was getting really good odds. But yes, I
yeah,
think they're
40%. Yeah, maybe.
yeah, but that's it. I mean, I really
That's
think
it.
that's
Yep.
it.
Yep.
And let's deconstruct this a little further, Rob. What other hands is he bluffing with that we could, because here's my problem with the bluff check raise on the turn. You're not leaving yourself enough on the river to follow up with a second barrel. Like 225 into 700. That's just not like, if you wanted to set up a big bluff spot, you should have check raised all in on the turn.
Right.
It wouldn't have made it, as it is. It was a pretty small bet. It was a pretty small raise relative to the pot
Correct.
size.
And
So
we always talk about how many value hands to bluffs you need to have based on your bet size and
mhm,
based on the size of the pot. And if you're betting what he did, he check raised to what, 1.25 over the original bet,
yeah,
which was a fraction of the pot size.
mhm,
The value to bluffs is going to be so huge. There's going to be so much more value in that bet than there are bluffs that you could probably just eliminate any possibility of a bluff and just say he's betting with 100% value.
yep, yep. I think so too. I think so too. So there's a really good response here from Jamel Cuevas, um, who has a couple good points here. He clarifies whether the original caller was the double flatter or if they were the original opener. He talks about how they tend to have more than one pair hands in this as played this way. Says with no obvious draws, the check raise on the turn seems strong, usually stronger than one pair. And he asks some questions about their range. Like, does he think that they might be overvaluing one pair that much? Or have enough bluffs where we cannot fold top pair. Jamel ends up saying, without a read, I could see folding to the turn check raise without a draw ourselves, since our hand will not likely get much better. And DaChiwaiian basically agrees there as well. Says that the turn check raise and river shove felt strong, since I had played the hand like I had a big ace. Right, I think that's true. Like when you do bet call the turn there, that does look like an ace a lot. And DaChiwaiian does kind of the same stuff we've been doing here, trying to come up with some value hands that he beats. And there's not a lot of them. Ace queen, ace jack. They might have 3-bet those themselves pre-flop. They're probably just getting to showdown now the way the boards run out. And he also can't find a lot of bluffs, even if you do include some of those 5-7, 10-7 hands. They're no longer bluffs on the river, because when the 9 comes in, now they've made the straight. So it just, I mean, we're getting a really good price on the river here, but I feel like it's hard to come up with hands that we're beating that take this line. The way I'm talking about it, Rob, it kind of sounds like we feel like this is a fold on the river, given our player's opponent type. I think if they felt bluffy, they had so many times to bluff this better. They could have check raised the flop when you're tiny sizing and no overcards made it attractive. They have a ton of stuff there they could have done it with. They could have check shoved the turn. And we always have to ask ourselves, like, our opponent had an opportunity to add fold equity on the turn and they declined. They could have added a lot of fold equity and they didn't. Instead, they left themselves like a quarter size, third size pot bet on the river, which has no fold equity. Not that we never fold to it, but it's not a scary bet. So if they were trying to get us to fold, there were better opportunities to do it. I just keep coming back value, and we don't beat any of the value. Am I nitty because I want to fold on the
No,
river here against the
no,
shove?
if you read Jamel's post, and we know Jamel is primarily a cash player,
And a
and he plays
fantastic player. Yeah.
correct, and he plays a lot of live cash. And
Yeah.
he says he would probably fold to the turn check raise
Yeah.
because he knows that this player could not be doing it with a bluff, and it's going to have value, and he has very few outs to improve. The only way he could improve is, let's say the 8 pairs and the guy had a 6.
Right.
Then
Counterfeits.
you counterfeit him, or if he gets a king. Very
Yep.
few outs that are going to improve to beat any 2 pair that he has already. So yeah, there's and like I say, Jamel's a very good cash game player. And if he's ready to fold on this turn, I think that's good advice.
Jamel was also our No Limit Hold'em Player of the Year a couple years ago, so he knows his tournament play as well. He's no stranger to both sides of the felt there. And I also think there's an argument, and cash games are different from tournaments. The incentives are different. The worst case scenarios are different. I think you can't even call the turn bet or the turn raise, because sometimes they shut down on the river and they don't shut. And you probably are winning a lot of the time with your top pair or top kicker, depending on the river that comes out. So I don't necessarily hate the call on the turn, but I do think it is a decision point, though. Yeah.
Yeah, this villain, it's villain dependent, and this villain is not bluffing. So
Right.
you're behind on the turn. Just fold.
That's a great point. And you have so few redraws, as you point out. There's not a lot of rivers that help you.
And like I always say,
if you are behind,
if you never fold to a bluff, you're not folding enough.
That's right. That's right. It's well put. And another thing that you always say is that when they lead big on the river, they always have it, especially at the low stakes tables. So if you're paying attention to the Washemisms, the evidence is really stacking up here that we should find a way to let go of this hand. And listen,
this is called an exploitive fold.
Yes. I love that. So it's like, and what Rob's saying there is, if you can find a fold when other players are going to pay this guy off, it's like you're putting chips right back in your pocket. Those chips are as good as having won a pot.
The math says to call.
Right.
The math says to call the turn and the river. The math says you need to call. But that's playing optimal poker, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas you learn optimal poker so that you can exploit certain types of opponents. This is a type of opponent that you exploit by folding anything less than 2 pair.
Yep, I like it. And just in absolute terms here, that $225 shove, that's half our buy-in. We started a buy-in at $450 here. So it's a non-trivial amount, even though, there's a lot of money in the pot right now, and obviously we'd love to win the pot. That's $225 that you just kind of get to put right back in your pocket instead of putting it in your opponent's pocket, because you have the discipline to make a very disciplined fold here. So I think
done.
Yeah, I think we're basically wrapping it up here. This is
a real bad internet. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's all right. That's all right. You only blipped out for a second or two. It's a really interesting spot, because I think, like you said it, Rob, the math is telling us one thing, and our sort of player tendency analysis is telling us another. And you don't always get to find out. You don't always get to be right, of course. The DaChiwaiian does not include the villain's hand or what ended up happening after that. So I think you mentioned earlier, we think he folded. And I think we feel like that was the right decision. Against certain opponents, you have to continue here. But even against those opponents, as we talked about, they had so many opportunities to apply fold equity earlier in the hand and they didn't. It does kind of feel like they're stringing you along a little bit. So you got to think, how often is the opponent that we're talking about making that kind of play with a bluff? Rob, is there anything else that we should mention about this before we roll on out of here?
No, that covers it.
Well, I love getting these cash hands in here. Let's get some more cash hands posted in the Rec Poker forums, folks. Maybe we can get Jamel or some of our other cash-friendly premium members to come join us in the conversation one of these times. That would be great. So big thanks to DaChiwaiian for putting this post out there and for sharing this point of uncertainty. That's how we get better. Of course, to Rob Washam and the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack and Casino, and you, the listeners, you're the best. We'll see you again next week.